Hello, and welcome once again to some Infinity the Game battle reports. These are two Hassassin Bahram battle reports, both recorded as part of the Loss of Lieutenant January challenge, which is to run fireteam duos, or duo-like fireteams, because you can, of course, have two-person Haris, Core, and Enematakos links, although not triad links, which have to be formed with 3 troops, and you can reach a duo status with them only by having a trooper leave during the game after the link has been formed. At the time of issuance of this challenge, I'd been primarily playing Vanilla Hack Islam after finishing up the Dash Out video, so this was very much a fuck you, play something different challenge, but it's been some time since I've played Hassassins, and so I looked forward to the chance to play a couple of Hassassin games just for these reports. So this is the list I'm running in the first of these two games, and it's built primarily around using the AVA4 of Assawiras in Hassassins to run a pair of chunky Assawira duos. Before I talk about the list, though, I want to talk about, generally speaking, what the use case for duos in N4 is, because they're somewhat of an underrated fire team. You don't see them particularly often, because obviously you don't get link bonuses when you're in a duo. All you get is the duo's ability to move 2 troops at the same time, and also, this is particularly important in this list, suppress Frenzy and Impetuous. But those are still extremely useful traits, and there are plenty of troops in the game that don't really need +1 burst to still be effective, which means that you can effectively run them in a duo and gain advantage of those additional benefits. Not only that, I've talked in the past about how the larger the link is, the more risk you assume by playing aggressively with it, and that's because moving models up the table towards the enemy puts them closer to the enemy and therefore exposes them to more risk. If you are closer to the enemy, it takes fewer orders for your opponent to move forward and engage you, so they can engage you more effectively. So by running a smaller link team down to a duo, you can still have the advantages of running a fire team, frenzy suppression, multiple models move with the same order, but you really limit how much of your army you're exposing to risk. It also gives you access to more independent combat elements in an army, because you are having you're suffering less of the effect that link, like say having a Core and a Haris has in a list, which is that 8 of your 15 troops are tied up in effectively 2 combat units. So this is an example of a list that uses duos as offensive elements, but there are other sectorals that can do this as well, and in particular, they're not uncommon in my local meta. We have, for example, a quite good Bakunin player who runs a Riot Girl Spitfire, which is a perfectly serviceable piece, paired with Avicenna, just for the equally fast Doctor and the Doctor that hangs out behind the Spitfire and is a specialist and suppresses the frenzy of the Riot Girl. So this is very much a play on that. We've got the classic Ghulam core. This is the core of basically every Hassassin list. You'll very rarely see a list that isn't at least based on a Ghulam core, sometimes with different wildcards. But in this case, we've got only the Bareed joining it, counts as a Ghulam, and then Yara Haddad as the firepower piece in the core. Basically as the only really active weapon, supplemented by the excellent Ghulam NCO. From here, we've got 2 Assawira duos, each of them comprised of an Assawira AP Spitfire and an Assawira Doctor with rifle and light shotgun. Assawira are just really good heavy infantry. They have almost everything that you could want: decent armor, excellent BTS, decent good close combat. They're fast. Not only that, they're good enough at dodging that you can pseudo increase their speed by move dodging and have them be 6-4 move much of the time. They average out about 6-3 point something, but still. And just well-rounded, good firepower pieces, good offensively, and with a high whip specialist. Not only that, but they have regeneration, which is excellent on a Fizz 14 model, and you have a Doctor in each link. Now you can actually, if the scenario does not recall for specialists, you can 100% downgrade those Doctors to non-Doctor, just shorter range Assawiras to pair with the Spitfires, and save the points. Because you can just crutch on regeneration to get something back up. You do not need Doctors in those links to support the Spitfires, but they're specialists. Not only that, they're good specialists. So you have those 2 teams, and then a Fidei running out Group 1, and then Group 2 is just Bareed, Killer Hacker, secondary piece in the second group to sort of do some different hacking. I like to have, basically, I like to have one of the bereads. So I always like to have bereads of different types, one killer hacker, one hacker, so that you can cover more bases. If I had to choose, I would take the regular hacker, but the KHD is very cheap and sort of very solid for its role. But I like to have them not in the same link, even though they can both join it. And that's because you don't both, they would have to declare different, they have to declare different, it's the same ARO when they're in a link team, and they can't because they have different programs, and each program is individually an ARO. So if you're laying out pitches and setting up a hacking network, and an enemy hacker walks into your pitcher area, what you really want is to have both bereads separate, not in the same link, so that they can each declare the best program. And then it's just dalami, because dalami are really quite good. Now, this list does suffer a little bit from what I would consider to be the Hassassin problem, which is that it basically tops out at 24-inch range. There is no gun in here that has better range than that, and Hassassins don't actually struggle to find troops that can fight effectively beyond that. The Shakush is perfectly serviceable. Even a Moyib heavy rocket launcher is not bad, although a Govad HMG is a bit too expensive for what it does. But just that those pieces tend to be crowded out by other things that you want just because of how efficient an Asawira profile is. So you're pushed towards taking your highest quality troops, but then your highest quality troops leave you without good range band weapons above 24 inches. You can reroute back and be like, no, I don't want to have all of those Asawira. I would like to have something different, like a Shakush to cover my bases. But there's a tension there, basically, and it's very easy to end up with a Hassassin list, especially, that just stops at 24 inches. And that lack of flexibility, and in particular, like every gun in this list, right? There are 3 good firepower pieces, and they are all Spitfire range bands. That's a level of inflexibility that what you're doing is you're relying on the quality of Asawira to make up for. I actually much prefer the list that I will play in the second game, which only has 1 duo, but still plenty of Asawiras, but it's more flexible and well-rounded. But we'll get to that when we get to that. In this case, I wanted to run 2 duos because the challenge was to run duos. And this is one of the few lists that really actually can do a pair of duos effectively. Most other lists you'd see sometimes 1 when they're useful. So this is the table that we're playing on, and I'm playing against a vanilla PanOceania player in Frostbite. Now my opponent is slightly new, but quite experienced against Islam in particular, and he's getting very good at stopping Hassassins. In fact, he's almost overbuilding for the Hassassin matchup. There are a lot of Acontecimento regular mine layers, and camouflage markers like DZ-bound mines, just because he has a regular mate that plays Hackislam against him, and he just does not ever want to lose to Hassassin for days. But that's fair enough, and it made for a good game in this case. And if I said Frostbite, I meant to play, say, supplies. So we're playing supplies. So that's part of the reason why I have 2 doctors in this list, obviously, is that they're quite good at picking up buttons in this scenario. Now, I have won the roll, and I have elected to go first. I think in this case, supplies is a scenario that you can kind of choose to go either way. If I win the roll, I'll often take deployment advantage and let my opponent choose. But going first, and specifically the reason why, is that going first in supplies, the onus is on you with a reduced order pool to pick up supplies and get them back to your base. Or to make an attack on your opponent that puts them on the back foot, and then you sort of leave the supply boxes until a later turn. And in particular, there's kind of this awkward tension that results from that, which is that if you take a lot of boxes, you are diminishing your turn 1 punch, which means your opponent has lots of time to get back into the game and has the last turn to take boxes from you. But if you maximize your turn 1 punch, very much like any other game, then your opponent has the last turn to grab a box and win the game. So it's just sort of, it's a game where I'm more comfortable with deployment advantage and then playing the hand that I'm dealt from there. Because I'm comfortable flexing between offense and objective play. I like to have a game sign as to which of those is the optimal path, rather than trying to set the tempo immediately on turn 1, often with imperfect information. And in this game, for example, I spent quite a lot of time wondering if there was a cutter waiting to emerge and mess me up. Which I think if I had been more experienced against vanilla PanOceania, I'd have known that that wasn't possible. My opponent had a list that was full to the gills, but didn't think of it, just was like, it's vanilla Pano, there must be a tag. So, an interesting game in that respect, but I'm playing Hassassins, and so I have a Hassassin Fide, and so sure, I'm going to choose to go first, because it'll give me the best chance to maximize that kind of attack. And hey, maybe after the dust clears from the Hassassin Fide's attack, I'll have some kind of an idea as to what I'm going to be doing with the rest of my turn. So let's have a look at deployment. So I'm deployed on, if we go back to this, I'm deployed on this side of the table. And I've gone with a relatively conservative deployment. I'm not putting anything on ARO because, again, at this point, I can't see what my opponent has. I'm just going to assume that there'll be a tag. So I've got, we've got a sort of core link team hunkered down on this rooftop here. The 12-inch deployment is pretty nasty here. We've got the Ghulam NCO at ground level, totally out of cover. Hoping that I'll just use his NCO order to move him forward. But obviously that's sort of non-ideal, but it's not in line of fire anything from my opponent's deployment zone. And we've got sort of similarly here, we've got the first Asawiro duo completely out in the open, but that's because they can't be seen from my opponent's DZ. You can see the other Asawiro duo is hanging out here. So again, very aggressively postured, ready to move up into some kind of aggressive position, move towards my opponent. We can also see here 2 of my 3 dalami, and the third is actually behind this building there. So they're all basically on the midline. Only one is standing, and it's got a relatively limited sort of pool, relatively limited line of fire. But it is it's sort of set up to Overwatch down here and here. And again, I'm doing that because what I want in this case is I want long flank shots with the dalami Panzerfausts, not necessarily shots directly into my opponent's deployment zone, because I assume when I'm deploying that there will be a big heavy firepower piece, which if the dalami reveal will immediately clean them off. And so what I want is for them to reveal in positions where my opponent's major firepower has to itself reposition, spending 1 or 2 extra orders to destroy them and clear the line of advance, which makes them much more efficient sinks of my opponent's first turn than if they were standing, let's say, here, for example, and had, could see the world, basically. Here we can see my opponent's deployment, and this is a peacemaker that's chosen to hang out way back. This is what I mean by aggressive anti-Fide deployment. Camo marker, peacemaker in Oxbot, motorized bounty hunter with template, Teuton Knight, Joan of Arc. All of this stuff is mutually supporting, overlapping. His other flank is like that as well. I don't have a picture of it, unfortunately. But it's just mines in positions to absolutely sort of shut me down. Which, it is what it is. He's invested heavily in stopping Fides. I've only got 1 Fide in this list. It goes for an aggressive gambit. We'll see that in a second. But overall, this is an interesting PanOceanian list. So what it doesn't have, I don't have a copy on screen. I'm sort of recreating it from memory. It's led by Joan, because she's excellent. It's got a Peacemaker, a pair of Acontecimento regular mine layers, a motorized bounty hunter, because it's regular with Joan, Warcore, Tech B, this camouflage marker that you can see down here. I don't know this at the time, but it is a Beast Hunter. Again, an excellent irregular choice with Joan. Discounted for being irregular, but then great because it's not. There's a Helot over here, which will be a pain in the ass, running theme of these games. But then apart from that, what it's running is a Hospitaller Knight, a Knight of Justice Hacker, an Unlinked Kahu, and that's a Hospitaller Knight Doctor, and then an Unlinked Teuton Specialist. And I probably should have cottoned onto the fact that, that's a bunch of heavy infantry and Joan. He's not going to afford a tag. But I just muscle memoried into the idea that it's vanilla Pano, it's going to have a tag. So that's on me. This is a really interesting list because all of those heavy infantry are quality. The Knight of Justice Hacker is a fantastic piece. There's a Mulebot hanging out back there as well, which is going to put supportware fairy dust on every heavy infantry at some point during the game. The Peacemaker has points to upgrade it to a Spitfire, So it can be a firepower piece as well. Normally he would position it more aggressively, but in this case he's just like, I am not losing the game to Fides. But it's limiting itself to just the Kahu as firepower. So it's really like, yeah, and the Spitfire stuff. It's really depending on not engaging a dominant ARO piece. Or if it does, actually, even an unlinked Kahu is pretty dangerous. But then it's got like a huge amount of ability to maximize Joan's coordinated orders. She can coordinate late deployable with the PanOceanian Consummento regulars. She can move those unlinked heavy infantry and firepower pieces up. It's just kind of cool. And it worked better than I expected, which is pretty neat. Anyway, my reserve drop is a Hassassin Fide, and it manages to find a position and drop down here, and he reserve drops his Knight of Justice to respond. So we've got some proxies here. That Orc with the Panzerfaust, that's a Kahu. And then there is a Tech B directly behind it, and then he's got the Knight of Justice here watching this suspicious mess. So I'm going first. The first order of the game is going to be the Kahu attack. So the Fide attacks. So it crawls into close combat with the Kahu here. And what it does is we've got Knight of Justice. I think we've just moved it so they can actually sit and see properly. It crawls into base contact with the Knight of Justice. So with the Kahu. And it basically wears, I think everything shoots it. I think everything is just like, oh, fuck, and lays into it. In response, it places its templates like that. So the templates are starting in base contact with the Fide. It's prone. The Kahu is standing. So basically just fires the shotgun over its head, and it hits everything there twice. And it does basically nothing. It does 1 wound to the Knight of Justice. The Kahu passes both saves. The Tech B passes both saves. The Knight of Justice passes only 1, and then collectively they shoot the car. They don't kill the Fide, but they knock it unconscious, which is enough. So that's disappointing, because the Kahu is standing. Now I think it's going to end up dropping prone because it fouls its guts, which is good, but still, like, damn. I would really have liked to have killed the Kahu, and I didn't, so that's annoying. But we're just going to have to proceed on with the turn. So there's going to be sort of like a general advance here, but the first thing that we do, we use the NCO order just to reposition the link, because I really want that Gulam NCO in cover. And then we move up on the right flank our Asawira Duo. And one of them gets to this door here, and then that takes it up to the rooftop. How we play, we don't want to play interiors on these buildings all the time locally, because it's very like finicky to lift roofs up, and the buildings have interiors, but like you see we put things on the rooftops here. It's just a bit of a recipe for disaster. So how we play it is that a movement skill at the door takes you to the position above the door, basically. Short movement skill, move. So you can get up onto rooftops relatively easily without having to climb if you can access a door, but you do still have to use that movement to get there. So an Asawira has gotten onto the rooftop, and it's begun engaging things that it can see. Again, kind of expecting a cutter to emerge. And it sort of puts firepower around ineffectually, and ends up taking a face-to-face roll with the Knight of Justice, who's over here. But again, it's that 24-inch range band problem. This fight is taking place at something like 26 inches, and it's all rather inconclusive. I think after about like 4 or more orders, I put the second wound into the Knight of Justice and drop it unconscious. But that's kind of it for the Asawira Duo. And in fact, that's about it for the first combat group. It's not a particularly effective first turn. I don't have time to take a box with either of the duos. Maybe I should have, maybe that would have been better. But fortunately, the second combat group will redeem it somewhat. And in fact, you can already see in this picture that a dalami has decamped and is moving that direction. And I've spent several command tokens to do this, because there's only 2 regular orders in that group, but a dalami makes its way up along the left side of the table towards my opponent's deployment zone, and begins to make an attack run. And I think what happens is that the bounty hunter declares a discover, and I just keep moving, and I end up in this position here. How we're playing those trees is they are solid from the base upwards, they fully block line of sight, but the dalami basically moves to there and back to see everything, and he has to reveal the Beast Hunter at this point, because I have a shotgun attack onto his war correspondent, like so. And so I'll be able to use that to hit the Beast Hunter, so he has to declare to reveal. He flamethrowers, he does some dodges, etc., and I just lay down my shotgun templates. And the dalami, I think the dalami is going to end up dying, but it takes 2 of those 3 models with it. That's the kind of trade that I wanted to be making with the Hassassin for day. So that's good. The turn otherwise kind of sucked. But ultimately, I've taken 2 irregular orders, turned regular by Joan, out of his combat, out of his list, and then I've dropped the Knight of Justice. So this is not a good first turn. It's pretty mediocre. Like 3 casualties is okay, and three casualties, honestly, out of it's 1/5 of my opponent's list. That's not bad at all, given that those models are not going to generate orders for the entire rest of the game. But I've made no scenario progress. I haven't really done. I've used a bunch of my resources. I've used several command tokens. I haven't accomplished anything even remotely decisive, and now my opponent gets to decide, is he going to play scenario or counter assault? And ultimately, he decides he's probably going to play scenario. So here we can see, this looks like an infirmary, but I assure you it is a hospitaler doctor. It moves up, basically. It's going to make the run up the table, and I don't have things really in position to stop it on this side of the table, except for this dalami here. And the dalami efficiently wastes a bunch of orders with this doctor. Sooner or later, the Asawira makes its dodge to sort of support the engagement. But it's going to dodge back pretty quickly when the Fuerbach Kahu stands up and unloads into him. So he very quickly ends up back there. But no wounds. I'm comfortable with that. It just wastes orders. But eventually the Asawira gets his head put back down again. And the Knight of the Hospitaller is going to win this fight eventually, and it takes out the dalami. And then with Whip 17, 2 dice, it grabs the box, and it makes a beeline back towards my opponent's deployment zone. Now, it doesn't get all the way there. It doesn't get all the way there. It has to sort of like nestle back behind this building. But it's in a pretty tricky position to attack. He's made a really good Joan coordinated order to move one of those last 4 inches and also place 2 mines with the Accomplishmento regulars. And there's a helot that's hanging out there as well. I could try and make a run at it with this Asawira duo, but to do so, I'd have to move through the helot line of fire and dodge through several mines, and then shoot it or close combat it? Because it's a Knight Hospitaller. An Asawira is better in close combat than a Hospitaller, but not by much. I think there's like 1 point of CC difference. So it was like he'd gotten it safe enough, while at the same time not really losing anything in the turn. So I decide I'm going to play this a little bit like Annihilation, and that I'll make a run on the objectives in the last turn. Not sure that's right, but for whatever reason, I'm actually kind of feeling behind. So this Asawira duo attacks. They come up my left flank, and they basically just absolutely go for it. And I end up with one of them coming along the roof and one of them decamping and coming around here. This is the Spitfire. This is the Roof Doctor. And I end up getting very unlucky with this guy. And he's engaging a Kahu in good range to try and put it down. And he just flubs it, gets crit, goes unconscious. He'll fail his regen roll and die as well. But he has at least killed... This was already killed by the dalami, rather. But the doctor on the roof makes up for it. He dodges a mine successfully. He kills this Accomplishmento. He kills the Peacemaker. He even wounds Joan before, with the last order, he's prone back to there. So the Kahu is prone again, but not dead. I've done a bunch more damage. This is 3 more wounds out of my opponent's. Oh no! Look, there's unconscious tech B. Something dropped that as well. Maybe that was the Fede after all. But it's a bunch more wounds out of my opponent. I'm diminishing my opponent's resources, but these attacks are costing me, and it's particularly nasty because that poor Asawira failed its regen roll and died. But we've got a frenzied Asawira basically in my opponent's deployment zone. And otherwise, yet more orders diminished from my opponent's pool, but my opponent still has that Hospitaller Doctor holding the box. And what that Hospitaller ends up doing is it just retreats further into my opponent's deployment zone and actually gets up onto this building and it heals the the unconscious hacker, who then activates, takes the beacon, takes the med box from the doctor, and nooks himself into this corner where he's never going to be visible from anything in my army ever again. So that's basically box secured for my opponent in a big way. That takes a fair bit of my opponent's orders this turn. And kind of like most of the rest of what he can do is just position to make a run on one of the other boxes in his last turn. So I've got one turn left to go at this point, and I need to do something with it because I've picked up 0 boxes at this point, and there's still a standing fucking Kahu watching a lot of the board. So at this point, I do what I actually really should have done much earlier in the game, and I take an engagement with Yara Haddad. So the first thing that happens is I get them all off the rooftop, and I get her, this takes a couple of orders, I get her up the board, and I engage and destroy this Teuton specialist who'd begun to move forward. She puts him down like a dog. She's super effective. And that's not a face-to-face roll that Teuton can really win. She's rolling 4 dice 19s there, and he's rolling whatever. Short of a crit, I've got the kill. And I don't get crit, which is really nice. I then, let's see if I can just change this over. I then lay smoke, and I move up this wall until I get just line of fire to the Kahu, who is hanging out over here. And so I've got cover from the building, and I'm in smoke, and the Teuton, so the Kahu only has an MSV1. It's easy to forget that MSV1s still suffer the smoke penalty, because we see them so often in links where they have 6th Sense, which will negate the penalty if they're being attacked. But this Kahu is unlinked. So Yara has gotten within 24 inches. The Kahu is suffering the penalty for being engaged through smoke. So if it shoots back, it's at -6. And it does shoot back, so it's looking for 7s, and she's looking for 16s. And again, I don't get crit. I'm slightly traumatized after some recent games, can you tell? And she puts it down. All of this, however, takes a lot of my remaining orders, and basically all I've got time for after that is for this Asawira to get back across this bridge, pick up this box, and then hunker down with it. And that's it. That's the end of my turn. Oh no, and get this Asawira forward and pick up this box and pull back. So I've managed on my last turn to just grab 2 boxes to my opponent's 1. But this Asawira is very exposed, and this Asawira is kind of exposed. It's not too bad, but there are a variety of things that are kind of in the open. This smoke is going to disappear. Yara is pretty easy to engage. I am relying heavily on the fact that I've done a lot of damage to my opponent so that he can't snatch the win. And how he could snatch the win is the play that he goes for, which is Joan of Arc stands up and fucking runs forward. So I can mark this out here. Yeah, she runs forward, and what she's looking to do is kill this dalami, run across the bridge, kill the Asawira, and pick up the box. And to do that, if she did all of that in the orders that she had, she'd have won the game, because I haven't touched the box that the Hospitaller exfiltrated. My opponent would have 2 boxes to my 1 and just have a clean win. However, this is kind of as far as she gets. She gets stalled up a little more than she wants, dealing with that dalami, putting down Yara Haddad, and ultimately what happens is that she realizes she can't get to the Asawira and kill it, so she just makes a play to draw line of sight by literally jumping onto that box there, or vaulting onto it, hoping to put him down and kill him. She's got, I think that's the mobility armor Spitfire profile, but I'm not 100%. Anyway, she makes the shot, the Asawira survives, and so I win the game. 2 boxes to 1. I'm not sure either player has done it classified, but I'm probably securing the HVT. So it's an on paper quite good win. But I think really what we did see this game, and how it certainly felt was, 1, I'm rusty with Hassassins, but 2, I definitely felt the relative lack of tactical options. And specifically what I mean by that is the list uses duos effectively to have a wider front from which it can attack, right? It's got kind of 4 effective combat options in that first group, with the 2 duos, the core, and that lone for day. But it pays for that sort of like combination of both powerful pieces and width. With it's not versatile. Every piece is kind of engaging in the same way, which is that it wants to shoot someone with an AP gun. It's a little inflexible in that respect, and what you're relying on is creativity with the terrain, and trying to sort of like do things around that, rather than launch different types of attacks. You're launching one pretty similar kind of attack a lot of the time, rather than launching or being able to launch different kind of attacks. So even though I think it makes quite effective use of the duos, Assawiras are totally serviceable in those duos. We saw attacks by both Assawira duos, and particularly on the left flank, they did plenty of damage despite some bad luck, and that Assawira on the rooftop there ended up holding a box. Overall, I feel like, say, if that duo on the right flank had been a heavier, longer range weapon, say a Shakush, it might have done considerably more than if it had been the Assawira pair that it was. So that's just a thing, a bit of commentary. We'll now jump into the second list, and how that performed. So this is a much more reasonable version of this list. This is I am playing an opponent who is more experienced, and I don't want to just spam duos. I want to actually run a much wider like array of potential options. And how we've done that is we fit in a guided missile package, and a second for day. That's kind of what we get for cutting the 2 Assawira duos down to 1. We get guided missiles, which is excellent. You can see the Shaitanaya itself is in that second combat group. We've also got more hacking in the list. So the core has both a Bereed Hacker Lieutenant and a Ghulam Hacker. They share a hacking device type, so they can both ARO, which is quite effective. And I've still got the KHD in Group 2. I've got 2 for days this time, which is a really nice quality of life change. Yara Haddad has strategic deployment to help mitigate some risks, with being outranged in the list. I've also fit a Dr. Assawira into the core. So I'm still running 3 Assawiras in this list, because Assawiras are really, really good. And I actually really like a core linked Assawira Doctor. What it means is that your link, if your core link positions to offensive posture, you've got Yara Haddad for out to 24, and then the Assawira for shorter ranged gunfighting. The Assawira are still excellent gunfighters, and a core-linked Assawira, even with just an AP rifle and light shotgun, is an excellent tip of the spear. And because it's 6-2 movement, you will find it just natively reaches that point at the front of the link where it's best positioned to make those attacks. Not only that, I actually think this is almost an ideal position for an Assawira Doctor, because it's a regenerating Phys 14 Doctor. So if everything goes to pot and your link gets like bombed out by missiles or something, there's still a really solid chance that the Assawira survives, regenerates, and then heals everything around it. So I like that as a link setup, with the caveat that the Bereed Hacker Lieutenant is a meta pick. You have to be relatively confident that your opponent is not going to identify and assassinate it fucking immediately, with KHDs or some other piece. Otherwise, it's very vulnerable. And locally, we have not too many killer hackers. People have generally come to the conclusion that hacking is a support function, and that trying to go all in on KHDs when you might not see lots of hackers or dominant hackers for them to prey on, especially not when you don't necessarily have lots of quality KHDs anyway. There's just the general like meta position of hackers where I play locally is that they are common but not dominant, and when they are present, they're often in a sort of support role, and basically KHDs as a piece, like finding a bunch of points, particularly for an elite killer hacker, there is not really a use case for it. You find a cheap KHD if you can, but those aren't super common, and otherwise, if you're running like say a zero KHD won't necessarily outfight, say, someone running a Chirontid or Anathematic Hacker. And it won't necessarily outfight an Interventor, and it won't necessarily outfight Jazz. So you don't don't run those kind of like light skirmishy KHDs. When I'm playing Nomads, I will very occasionally put a bandit KHD in, but much more likely it'll be a bandit forward observer, because then I can't be killed by enemy trinity, etc. So I felt like it was reasonably safe to play a Bereaved Lieutenant. Except that then my opponent turned out to be it was local player Ed running Spiral, and I realized I had to take some immediate countermeasures to deal with what he was going to do, which we'll get to in a moment. So this list is much more, there's one duo, and this is what I would call kind of the ideal use case of a duo, is it's just part of a combat group. You're not trying to spam them. It's like a little bit of extra capability. And particularly in this case, if I need to, I can fold that duo back into the core and rebuild it even into a big chunky, like triple heavy infantry core. So it's flexibility in a sectoral, which is a great thing to have, basically. Otherwise, we've still got the dalamis. One of them is in combat group 1 here. It just felt pretty solid, basically, to do that. Give me a different combat vector. If I wanted to in the first turn, I could run up with that dalami. Overall, felt like a good list, and once again, we were playing supplies. So this is the table. We've got some sort of mixed elevation. The photos kind of cut it off a little bit, but there's going to be there. That's a tower with it's not in a deployment zone, but there's a fair bit of visibility from it. And there's otherwise just a mix of high ground and low ground. All of the buildings are kind of configured for mobility into the table. So you'll see basically none of the buildings will have walkways that lead back down into the deployment zone unless they are also connected to ways down into the DZ, ways down into the middle of the table. That's just my modus operandi for deploying this table at this point. As a rule, you really want to enable people to get onto those rooftops and off them again. And if you have all of the buildings with the staircases pointing away from where the action is, just leaving, decamping is very difficult. So in this case, my opponent wants to test something, basically. Wants to test a list concept, which kind of requires him to go first. Now, I don't remember if we actually, I don't even remember particularly how we did this, but I think we ended up like rolling the dice, and I won, and then I'm just like, well, what do you want to test? We'll just do that. It's fine. So in this case, my spiral opponent is going first. And this is where my choice of from Bereaved Hacker Lieutenant kind of comes back to bite me a little bit, because I know immediately that my opponent will identify it as my lieutenant as soon as it's deployed. And I also know that my opponent loves Gripe operators. So I take the decision in this case to reserve drop my Bereaved. So we'll go through my deployment first, but just to note, I did deploy second. My opponent is deploying. My opponent is going first here. So we've got an Asawira duo hanging out here. This is a Gripe operator that my opponent will reserve drop. We've got the missile bot in the corner there. It's actually kind of watching back along the table edge and up there, but it's not really an Overwatch piece. We've got the core link hanging out here. And important to note, this Bereaved, this is my Bereaved Lieutenant, it deployed as my reserve. And the reason why it deployed as my reserve is that, sure enough, my opponent went hunting with a Gripe. This is the impersonation marker here. And he went looking for lieutenant options. And when he could not find a light lieutenant option that was clearly my lieutenant, he just deployed in a relatively safe, ready to activate position. But I guarantee you 100% that if I had deployed this Bereaved here right at the beginning of the game, then the Gripe would have deployed probably prone there or prone there, and just fucking gone for the execution immediately. Like, no questions asked. 100% would have happened. So I reserve dropped my Bereaved purely to deny my opponent easy visible access to my lieutenant until after he deployed his impersonator. Then overall, we've got a light right flank with just the lone killer hacker Bereaved and a flash pulse bot. I'm just trying to set up kind of a hacking network here, but it's all a bit mixed. And we have my HVT over here. For my opponent's part, we've got an unlinked Dral hanging out up here. You can see one of my Fidays there deployed kind of conservatively. It's very close to the supply box. We've got a tricore here of Nima Satar. who is actually Nima, fucking Spiral, or like what's real and what's not. Nima, anyway, it ends up being Nima Sitar, I think a real Kriegel agent, and then that Costel engineer is actually the Tricor model. And then up here we have, and then this was sort of quite relevant. We've got a bunch of Chaxas, a Kael'tar, a bioengineer, and a total reaction Chaxa. And my opponent deployed it because the gun was getting in the way. My opponent deployed it facing away from me. And I actually had to ask, is the Chaxa actually facing that direction? And he's like, well, it's a 360 visor. What does it matter? I'm like, 360 visor means it has a 360-degree front arc. But which way is the model facing? Because if it's not actually a Chaxa, it's facing, and it's something pretending to be a Chaxa, which I bet you it fucking is, its facing is going to be relevant. And he's like, oh, no, you're right. Okay. So, and of course, it immediately jumps into a link. It's like, okay, cool. It's a Tagma sniper. You had me going for all of like half of a second, you cheeky bastard. But yeah, so the bioengineer, I think, ends up unlinked. Yeah, so what's the link? Yeah, the link is despite the Chaxa over here, the link is the Kael'tar, the bioengineer, and then the obvious Tagma sniper. We've got helots and mines flipping everywhere. And then you can also see up here a Dral marksman rifle unlinked with her mine behind her. So I don't quite see what's happening immediately here, but it'll become very evident by sort of like midway through my opponent's first turn. So first thing he does is attack of opportunity, and this Greif operator discovers and fucking puts down this poor Fade and kills it. But the Greif can't make a lot more headway. The Asawira manages to dodge out and get a line on it, and that line is sort of like more than 8 inches. At this point, he doesn't really... He wants to make the Greif my problem to deal with in my turn. So it's got a 25-point kill. Fantastic. It just sort of stops doing what it's doing. The next thing that happens is that this dalami is engaged, not through smoke, it's just engaged directly by the non-Tricor linked Tagma sniper. He makes the discover roll. He's going to discover on 9s. I just shoot back. I reveal and fire, because if he makes that discover roll, I'm dead. And I win the face-to-face roll. I roll something like an 8, and he rolls like a 15, 14, and a 3. And it's not Tricor linked. So I win, and the Panzerfaust clears it up, just kills it straight to dead. That's super lucky. Like, it's not only the fact that I won the face-to-face roll, but also just that he died. That's really significant. But he recovers really, really well and executes the plan that he wanted to execute anyway. So on screen, we can see here, this is a mirror ball zone. So that's eclipse created by the Symbio bomb on the Dral. Basically, the rest of my opponent's turn is spent moving up the Dral and claiming that objective. And then moving up Eclipsos and claiming this objective. And I don't think I have a picture of it, but he also moves up the other Dral on the other side of the table and claims that objective. And he just spends like 3 command tokens coordinating them all backwards. Now, I'm able to do some dodging and move some things around, and I make some things a little bit more tricky for him, and the fact that his Tagma sniper is down actually really helps what I can do here to slow his withdrawal. But TLDR, he gets a lot of the stuff out. Most of it, but not all of it, back to his deployment zone, although the Clipsos ends up only being able to go basically around behind that nook there. So he is, at the end of this turn, holding all 3 supplies objectives, which is a lot. Like, he's holding literally all of the marbles. Now, to do this, what's he had to do? He's lost a Tagma sniper, which was lucky for me. But then in addition, he spent a lot of command tokens, and he hasn't quite pulled everything back. So the game for me, the game has changed radically as a result of this play. And his objective now is to survive. And I have to, like, really fucking kill him. Like, kill the shit out of him. Because I have to go and claim those objectives. He has to now defend, basically, for 3 turns. So it's a very interesting dynamic. We actually talked about this after the game. And the conclusion that we came to is that he should have grabbed 2 objectives. And then, with those coordinated orders, flung a Dral forward while pulling the other 2 pieces back. And attacked. And put a little bit of a dent in me. Put me on the back foot just on the first turn. Because I came out of this turn with basically just 1 Fade as a casualty. So I think a slightly more offensive mix of order expenditure would have been better. Not least because this link was in position to really get like very badly attacked by a Draal potentially. But he went with grab everything, pull everything back. When grab two things, fling a Draal forward might have been better. Because Draal, by the way, unlinked Draal are great solo attackers under the right circumstances. But regardless, it's now on me to like winkle him out of his deployment zone. And it's Spiral, so that sucks. Because Spiral are hard to attack. So this is where we start. The Buried, so that thankfully the Tagma is down. So what I'm going to do is I activate the core link and I get 2 pitches down with the Hassassin Buried. And you can see them having dropped there. And then I start spotlighting things because I don't want to push into his deployment zone directly. And we spotlight this Tagwa. It's not a Tagwa, sorry, this is a Kriegel agent. It's actually real. I spotlight it, and I drop a fucking missile onto it, and I catch Nima, and I think I wound Nima, and I kill the Kriegel. So that's good. That's a start. I can actually push into the deployment zone now. From there, I move that Asawira duo up. It takes them like 1 order more than I would like to kill the Greif Operator, but they put the Greif Operator down, and then they make a beeline towards that Clipsos holding a supply box. And basically, this is where we end up. This Asawira has moved in. I think I have to wear like 3 SMG shots from that helot. But I get into melee with and kill the Clipsos and pick up the box and survive. And that's it. That's my turn. It's not as much damage as I would like, but it's still a pretty good position because I haven't overextended my forces. And I'm slowly getting up on attrition, and I have 2 more turns to do this. So what we can see here is like we can see the hunker down position where the Buried and the Gulam NCO have dropped the fuck prone because if that Buried gets shot, my opponent knows at this point it's my lieutenant. He's 100% sure, even though the NCO is spending all the orders. But then this team, the Yara and the Asawira have moved up to sort of like have covering fire down there. And we're kind of just hoping to hold. That's the Asawira Spitfire. It's done some work. It shot some things. It's dropped prone. And basically I have this poor Asawira over here that's kind of like lap of the gods. Now, all that said, for my opponent's part, he's running low on resources, right? So his Tricore has had a Kriegel blown out of it. One of the Draal has had to run, like lots of his pieces are just running back to his deployment zone. So like there's a 40-point marksman Draal that doesn't want to do any more fighting because it's holding a box. There's a 33-point submachine gun Draal that doesn't want to do any more fighting because it's holding a box. He's lost his Tagma. He's running really low on things that he can fight with. And he's holding 2 out of 3 boxes now. So he's got an interesting choice where does he get aggressive against me? Because he's sort of down on pieces he can attack with. Eclipse is dead as well. Or does he just continue to pull back and hunker up and hope that his defense holds? And there's actually a line of play where if we tab all the way back to the map overview, my link team right now is sitting on this building. And his Draal is on this little rooftop. His marksman Draal's on that little rooftop here. He could have gone up. He'd have to have manually climbed like all the way up this tower, and would have taken several orders. Like he could have like jumped onto a balcony and then moved up around. But there was a line from the top of that tower down onto my core link rooftop here. And if he'd taken that shot, it's probably within 24 inches. The marksman Draal could potentially have killed my Hassassin Buried and put me in lull for a turn. Now that would not necessarily have won him the game because I could have just weathered that turn out, pulled back, held my position, etc. And it would have cost him just about all of his orders to do that. But it was an interesting line of play. He didn't see it at the time. He went for something else instead. What he did was he took this Draal and he came all the way around here and reformed his Tricore, which we can see here. Now, ultimately, he was kind of 1 order short of really being able to do what he wanted, but this is where he came to. Along the way, he handed off the objective that he was holding on this draal. He left it with someone else. I can't remember who ended up taking it from him. But he came all the way over here, and he was basically like kind of one order short of what he wanted to do. And so this is his last order. Is he's moved the draal to there and reformed the tricore. So that's a draal with a symbiomate, but it's standing in the open, and it's tricore linked. And he's kind of at this point just like, well, if I lose too much, I'm going to go into retreat and probably win the game. And if I hold, then I'm probably going to win the game because the draal is still very dangerous. But she is in this awkward position where she can't. The 8-inch tether basically is kind of about there. There's not a lot of distance that she can move away from this draal in the corner and maintain the link coherency. But she's now a really tough objective for me to kill. She does, however, and you can see here. Remember my Asawira used to be up here? Yeah, he's dead now. He went down to the draal. So this is potentially a very straightforward attack for me if I just move Yara. Like, Yara Haddad is my best piece easily to engage that draal. She has an MSV1. All she needs to do is she can take that fight potentially through smoke and take the kill. All I need to do first is get past a healer with a marksman rifle. I use my last command token to form up, because there's a Ghulam hacker that is hanging out back here that I can't easily get around to do the attack that I want. So what I do is I spend my last command token to reform the link to include the Asawira Spitfire. So it's these 5 models. And then I move Yara forward. And then she dies to the fucking healer. She just crits on an 11, and she fails her save, and she goes unconscious. And I've got a doctor right behind her, but I've used too many command tokens at this point. So that sucks. I could have laid smoke. There are a number of other things I could have done, but I chose to just take the face-to-face roll, 4 dice 16s, 3 dice 11s, and I lost. And there she goes. She's down. She's shock immune. She's a great piece, especially with a doctor behind her. But down she goes. So at that point, it's like, well, that sucks. What do we do about this? Let's just make the best attack that we can. And so I think one order gets spent. Like, this Asawira vaults up over here, ends the fucking healer, and second order picks up the box that is lying down there. And then we just activate the Fide. And the Fide goes it goes down here and around there and all the way around there, and it drops some smoke, and my opponent has 6th sense and he's dodging as it approaches through the smoke. But in the end, it gets into this link. And it does that sort of same thing where it comes around here and into melee, so that if my opponent shoots in ARO, it can lay the templates down like that, because a model is never hit by its own template. Or shotgun's not, or something, who knows. And it survives. The Fide actually just tanks, I think just tanks the shots, or something, maybe he dodges, but the Fide just makes it. And he puts that Tagma down, and then closes in. And I think it ends up gets into the draal as well. And through the symbiomate, it just cuts them both down like dogs. Which is actually fucking extraordinary that it managed that. I'm not 100% sure that, because this game was played about a week ago now. But yeah, damn. What every Fide previously could not do. One of them just got shot by a Greif. One of them got just minced trying to take down a Kahu. This guy just made it. He just made it in, and he puts everything down and survives the subsequent attacks. I think maybe he got viral pistoled and just spanged every one of those damage 12. Yeah, that's what happened. So he just passed 4 BTS rolls because a viral pistol's only damage 12, and he just lived. The one in, God, that's not high odds of passing all of those. And he just does it. He takes them out. He's not able to get around. I was thinking about how I could do the clean sweep, because there's another draal that's hanging out sort of down there, But he ends up just being like, no, it's fine. I'm gonna take this one out and pick out the box, and we're done here. And at this point, we actually forget that this is only my second turn. We think this is the last turn because we've like bloodied each other so badly. We think it's the last. It wasn't. This was the this was the second turn. But since we're both convinced it's the last turn, we end the game there. With me holding 2 boxes to my opponent's 1. But overall, a really interesting game. And this was a better use case for like the duos, right? Where, notwithstanding Yara's bad luck, we had the 1 duo move forward as attack piece. It did everything that it needed to do, right? It moved up in the wake of the hacking missile attack. It cleaned off some pieces. It grabbed the objective. And then when one of the models went down, it folded back into the core. And if Yara hadn't eaten shit to a Helot, it would then have that Asawira Spitfire would have been the tip of the spear for like a new engagement. So that didn't happen, but I think it sort of showcases the like, yeah, cool, that's just a useful tactical element in a combat group that's points expensive, but it's not using up so many troop slots that you miss out on, like, for example, the 2 Hassassin for days. And I really, when I'm playing Hassassins, I really like having 2. 3 is too many, but two is just right. 2, if you're going first, you can reserve both of them with the command token. Just generally super, like, they give you, 2 for days gives you a countermeasure against the fact that you only have 24-inch range weapons. So does the missile launcher. That's one of the big reasons why I like this version of the list much, much better, because it's got not just one, it's got 2 extra elements that are effective at dealing with the fact that your main guns are 24-inch range band. It's got 2 for days rather than just 1. So you've got 2 things that can like put down enemy Overwatch pieces, particularly like more fragile core linked elements. Like the Kahu is the classic, right? Or a Grenza sniper or a Bolt sniper. You've got 2 for days to make that attempt. But then also you've got the missile strike. Missile strikes are you've got good linked hackers with linked pitches. Hackislam hacking is probably the most cost-effective, not the best, but the most cost-effective hacking in the game. But you've just got really efficient ways of launching that strike. It'll use a lot of orders. It used up most of my orders on my first turn. But it made a kill that I wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. And if I'd had to engage the Tagma sniper, it would have been my best chance for dealing with that as well. So I really like the like flexibility of the missile strike in addition to the Spitfire and the AP marksman rifle and the 2 for days. This is a better version, I think, of a list, and it still uses a duo really effectively, and I think is sort of a bit of a gold standard in duos. So that concludes this video. Hope you enjoyed it. As always, please leave feedback or questions in the comments. Really enjoyed listener feedback and questions so far. Next video, not sure. I actually have a tournament coming up tomorrow. It's the CanCon in Australia is running. Infinity is not running at CanCon, but we're running off-site on the same day. The scenarios are Frostbite, Supplies, and Acquisition. I am thinking of taking Toha. Combined army would almost certainly be a better choice, but I haven't played Toha in a while. I kind of miss them. So I might just do that. We'll see. I might do something about how that went if I can get some photos. Otherwise, as always, it's great to hear what people would be interested in hearing about. I've got some requests, including for Drews. Maybe might do a Drews video. Bit of a self-flagellation exercise, but they are better than they used to be by a considerable margin. So we'll see. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you all next time.